Hi, I'm Sage. I read books, and today I'm going to be talking about what I read in April. So here we go. First, we have The Other Merlin. This is a story about basically women can't practice magic in the castle, and so Merlin's daughter, Emery Merlin, gender bends and disguises as her brother to learn magic in the castle. She meets Arthur, and they fall in love, right? You know, that kind of stuff. For this, I really like this, but there were like a lot of issues that like I couldn't ignore. One that really bugged me was okay, so this was advertised as LGBTQ Merthyr, right? Because this is inspired by BBC's Merlin, and you can feel that throughout the books. That was one of my favorite parts because it paid homage to BBC's Merlin really nicely, and I enjoyed that. But for the LGBT Merthyr tags, that's a little bit misleading because one, we have Emery Merlin here and Arthur. So obviously that's a straight couple. And Emery is supposed to be bisexual. This is the part I take issue with as a person who's bisexual. Now, I've been told a lot, like, you know, oh, you haven't dated women. How do you know like women? How do you know you like women? And so I understand that like characters don't have to prove their sexuality to me, but the narrative will not shut up about it. So that drives me nuts because it doesn't add anything to the character, nothing to her convictions, nothing to like conflict, nothing. Her bisexuality does not add anything. Now, that wouldn't be too bad if she at least, and I say at least, talked to other women. This girl would not introduce herself unprompted. She only talked to men. And that bugs me because that falls into the category of like those girls who are just one of the guys and like kind of put down other women. Now the character herself didn't put down many other women except for people she thought was prissy, and that's the problem. All of the women in this book are portrayed as prissy. Okay, there's one person, one of her friends from her hometown, who we don't get, like we get 2 seconds of, but everyone else is portrayed as prissy and vain and or evil. Like I just it that bugs me. Anyway, so this is like chicken to Lore's beef. I read Lore next, and this was so good. You have a similar situation with Lore where she wanted to be something but couldn't because her society puts down women, and I liked that. That was a good motif in this. Now, obviously, Lore is not bisexual, or at least she doesn't she doesn't claim to be bisexual. She could easily be bisexual. I don't know. You never know, Iro. Or is it Iro? I don't know how to pronounce her friend's name. Anyway, Lore was really good. I really liked the writing of this. By the way, I think I gave this 3.5 stars. Anyway, this one is a solid 4 out of 5. 5 is like top of the top my favorite books. So anyway, this is a 4 out of 5. There were some things near the end about that I didn't particularly care for, and a certain trope that it fell into that I was really hoping it didn't fall into, and then it did anyway. But yeah, I really did like this book. I liked a lot of the characters. Everybody sounded different, which is nice because it's hard to write dialogue that fits for the story, but also makes you understand who's talking without the dialogue tag. And that was definitely throughout this book. The storytelling was really good. There are just a few things about the end that I didn't particularly like, but more into that when I actually review the book, which stay tuned. And then I read Ice Dragon by George R. Martin. And this is like one of the only short stories I've ever read. This was only like 90 pages, 7,000 words. I got this for $1 at a thrift store. It was really worth it. I enjoy this, and I will be keeping it for like a cute little reread. Like this isn't something I'm absolutely in love with, but this is something that if it's snowing outside, I'm gonna read this book with a cup of coffee or something. Um, this is generally about. I didn't even tell you what lore is about. I'll do that in the review. This is about a little girl who has an affinity for the cold and absolutely loves winter and waits all year because she wants to see the ice dragon, which ice dragons are generally bad omens, considered bad omens where she lives. So yeah, this is really fun. It does get a little bit gory, so this is not necessarily a kid's book. Now on to my rereads. I reread Percy Jackson because my sister hadn't read it yet, so I'm like, you know what? Can I just read you the first chapter? And that turned into a whole thing. We're currently working through the second one, but we finished this, and I still absolutely love this book. There's so much about it that's just so fun. And whoever said that he doesn't talk like a 12-year-old clearly only hangs out with the 12-year-olds that everybody says are mature for their age, aka most likely the kids who are not very social, like me growing up. Anyway, but he is so funny, so sassy, and I could see my 12-year-old self doing a lot of these things if I were on these dangerous quests. Um, Percy is one of my favorite characters of all time. I will never not love this book. So obviously this gets a 5 star, even though there are things that I could say, oh, this is probably not the best. But one thing I will say this is like one of the best of is the middle grade writing style. You don't have to write bad to write middle grade. I really despise books that try to excuse their plot holes, excuse the low level of quality on the fact that it's written for children. Children are not dumb. If I had read, well, okay, there are certain books that if I had read them when I was 10, I definitely still wouldn't have liked them because I had decently high standards because I had read this when I was 10. So, yeah, this is one of my favorite examples of middle grade can be good. Middle grade does not mean bad writing. So, now on to our dishonorable mentions. These are books that I didn't finish or I just vehemently hated. So to start with, we have Fool Without a Master, and this one is just like I didn't finish. This is by Shelley Crowley. I usually don't put. I feel weird putting an indie author on here, but I did buy this book and I was upset. So I had this idea to read and rate all of the Merlin BBC inspired books. Now, obviously, this one is less Merlin related than the previous one because this isn't actually Merlin and Arthur. You have a jester and a prince, but I didn't get far enough to actually get into anything to do with them because the writing style is very bland. The prose is very cookie cutter. I just don't know what's going on. Like, I can't remember a single line from the story. Now, usually when I read a book, there's like one or two sentences that are just so pretty that I just remember them, or just so intriguing that I remember them. I can't remember a single thing from this book. I DNF'd it within 3 chapters. 3 chapters? Yeah. I usually give something about 40 to 50 pages, and I DNF'd this at like page 42. The pacing had issues. It is a different type of storytelling, but I don't think that excuses the way it's written. And the last thing I want to mention is the formatting or lack thereof. Hopefully someday that gets fixed, but this is just not. This was not for me. This gets a 2 star, maybe. And then The Last Shadow Warrior. Now, I had just finished Percy Jackson, and Percy Jackson had revitalized my hope in middle grade fiction. So I was like, yeah. And I didn't even read the back of this before buying, although I didn't particularly care because I do know someone who would probably like this. But I started it and I got 40 pages in, and I was like, oh no, because it reads like off brand Cheerios if Off Brand Cheerios were a book. This is exactly the opposite of Percy Jackson, where I said, see, Percy Jackson proves it doesn't have to be bad quality. This is the one that is bad quality and tries to excuse that by saying, oh, well, it's for children. I wouldn't. I wouldn't even give this to kids I know. I would give it to someone I know who already likes bland middle grade. I mean, no insult, but I do know someone who would like this more than I would. So, but they're not a child. They're someone who just enjoys reading a lot of different stuff. So, yeah, this will go to someone, but we hadn't gotten any decent writing within the first 30 pages or so. And the one thing I will say about it is it's kind of believable that the main character is 12. Say kind of believable because all of the dialogue was very meh. So I'd give this probably a 2 stars. It doesn't deserve a 1 star. And last but not least, we have Percy Jackson, the graphic novel. Now, I am going to spoil a few things about this and try to avoid spoilers about Percy Jackson in general, but this gets a 1 star. And the reason for that is partially because it's based on something that I already really love, and it just manages to completely mess that up. I would say I would rather watch the movie than read this. I got maybe 30 pages in. So the first thing was I went into this book with, oh yeah, I'm gonna read this. This is gonna be so cute. I'd always wanted to see these. But I went to the back to see my favorite part. The part where someone does something that pretty much anybody who was paying attention saw coming, but I did not see coming when I read it the first time. Uh, but I went to look at that, and they completely cut that scene out. Instead, um, we have one of our characters explaining the situation. I just I I couldn't, because that was one of my favorite parts for that character, and they just cut it out. But I was like, "Oh, okay." So I started trying to read it, and it gives some of Grover's lines to Nancy. It completely changes the tone of a scene, and they cut so much. Like, it's sort of just like if someone took storyboards and published those. Like, instead of like filling them in, they just took the storyboards and were like, yeah, these are our key plot points. That's all we need. That's utterly confusing. If I didn't know what was going on from the book, I would not understand what was going on in this book. Also, this is like, I'm not sure if this is a minor gripe, but Mr. D, instead of wearing tiger print, is wearing cheetah print. Now, if I'm correct, there's something to do with Mr. D in the lore where tiger print is appropriate and cheetah print is not. So, yeah. Anyway, if you have any thoughts on this, feel free to comment. It would really help if you liked this. And if you want to know what I'm reading in May or the reviews for the books I read in April, those will be coming shortly. So please subscribe. Have a great day.